بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين. Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to our third session of this class, Contemporary Jurisprudence. We said we will discuss contemporary issues and legal theory of Islam, issues that were never discussed before, that never applied during the times of the Imams because of the new technological and scientific breakthroughs and advances, and because of the fact of the globalism that is happening and the migration of Muslims to places that they had never went. We began last week to speak about the moon sighting issue, and we mentioned the different views about the moon sighting. Which areas can we rely on when it comes to determining the new month? And we mentioned two main views. The first view that we mentioned was the view that we call ta'addud al-afaq, the view of multiple horizons. And we said this view sees and holds that the moon must be sighted in your local area, and we cannot rely on moon sightings of far distant areas. And then we spoke about the second view, and that is wahdat al-afaq, the view of unity of horizons, where the entire world, wherever the moon is seen, then the entire world can rely on that. It's sufficient for the entire world. And we gave the arguments of each of the two different views. Now, regarding the second view, wahdat al-afaq, the unity of the horizons, I wanted to mention today two views of current ulama who accepted this second view, wahdat al-afaq, unity of horizons, but they made slight modifications to it. They could not accept it in its general broad form. The first modification that I wanted to mention was the view of Sayyid al-Khou'i rahmatullahi alayh. One of the main proponents of this view, wahdat al-afaq, was Sayyid al-Khou'i rahmatullahi alayh. But Sayyid al-Khou'i said we cannot accept this view in its broad form, because that will lead us to a problem. And that problem is, if we say when the moon is spotted somewhere in the world, the entire world will have the next day as the first month, that will mean that half of the world, their new month will begin during the day. Sayyid al-Khou'i said that's not possible. Let me give you an example. Let's say the moon is spotted in New York. Usually the moon is spotted during sunset. So that means this new night is the first night of the new month. But however, for people who are in China, for people who are on the other side of the world, India, China, parts of Asia, what that will mean is when the moon was spotted in New York, it was daytime there. And Sayyid al-Khou'i says the new month cannot begin during the day. And that's why he made a modification. He said, if the moon is spotted anywhere in the world, all areas that share a portion of the night with the area in which the moon was spotted, their new month will begin. If they don't share a portion of the night, then their new month will be the following day, not the next day, the day after that. So unless their nights overlap, then they cannot rely on each other. For example, Detroit, in the summertime, because the night is very young, it's very short, Detroit doesn't share any of the night, for example, with Iraq or Iran. So if we spot the moon in Detroit or in New York, then the people in the Middle East cannot rely on us, because anytime it is night here, it's day there. Anytime it's night there, it's day here. So our two nights, the two nights of Detroit, for example, or New York and the Middle East, they don't overlap in the summer, so they cannot rely on each other. Now, why did Sayyid al-Khou'i believe in this view? Why did he say that the two areas have to share a portion of the night? Sayyid al-Khou'i said that in the Islamic calendar, night comes before day. The 24-hour period has to begin with night. So a new month must begin with night. And he based this on a hadith from the Imams where they told us the new month must begin, the new day must begin with night. First comes night, then comes day. And that's exactly the opposite of the Gregorian calendar. With the normal calendar that we use, first we have Friday the day, and then comes Friday night. In Islam, it's the opposite. Friday night comes before Friday the day. It's indeed Thursday night. That's why when we read Dua Kumail, we refer to that night as Friday night. Laylatul Jum'ah is when we read Dua Kumail, but it's an hour, in our count, in our calendar, it's Thursday night, but it's indeed Laylatul Jum'ah in Islam. It's Friday night. You have Friday the night, and then after Fajr, Friday the day begins. So because of this point, the fact that the new day, the new 24-hour period must begin with night, the new month must begin with night, Sayyid al-Khoi says if the moon is spotted in Detroit and it's night here, we begin. Anywhere that it's night in the world, they can begin. But if in China or India it's day, how can they begin their new month? We have to wait until the day finishes, and only then when night comes, they can begin their new month. So anywhere in the world where it is day, they cannot rely on us. They have to wait until the night. So that means this day and the night before that, which is the 24-hour period, we cannot consider it as the first day of the new month. Only after the night begins in that second area, they can consider it as the new month, because the new month cannot begin with day, it has to begin with night. So this is the first modification of a Sayyid al-Khoi. As long as they share a portion of the night, they can rely on each other. The second modification was made by Sayyid al-Hakim, Sayyid Sa'id al-Hakim. He also accepted this view, the view of Wahdatul Afaq, but he made another type of modification. And he accepted this view because of the ahadith of the Imams that we mentioned. If you remember last session, we said that one of the arguments that the proponents of this view use is the hadith of the Imam, where the companion, he came and he asked him if after Eid, for example, they come and they tell us from another city that they saw the moon on the night in which we didn't, the Imam said, make it up. Sayyid al-Hakim, he accepted this hadith, but he said that other city that we rely on must be a city where it was discovered back then during the times of the Imams. So for example, they were living in the Middle East. If it was in Europe, if it was in India, if it was in Africa, because of these areas were discovered back then, we can rely on them. But the undiscovered areas, for example, North America, South America, Australia, we cannot rely on those areas because they weren't even discovered. The Imam couldn't have been talking about them when he said, if someone from another area saw the moon, you can rely on them. The Imam couldn't have, meant even those areas that weren't discovered because they didn't exist on the map back then. So as long as that other area was discovered back then obviously the Imam, because he did not make, a condition, he didn't confine, he just said another area, then the entire discovered world of that time is okay. So if the moon was spotted in India, like we said, if it was spotted in Europe, if it was spotted in Africa, people in the Middle East, they can rely on that because the Imam said another city, and those are other cities. But if the moon is spotted in places where they were not discovered in North America, that means the people of the Middle East cannot rely on that because the Imam couldn't have meant and addressed those cities because they were never discovered. And that's why Sayyid al-Hakim, he divides the world into two parts. The first he calls Al-Alamul Jadid, the new world, the undiscovered parts, South America, North America. And the second is the old world, and that is basically Africa, Asia, and Europe. He says if the moon is spotted anywhere in the old world, in Asia, in Europe, in Africa, the entire world can rely on it. So if someone spots the moon in the Middle East, the entire world can rely on it. But vice versa, no. If the moon is spotted in the New World, if it's spotted in North America and South America, it is only enough for the New World, for them. People in the Old World, or in Asia, in the Middle East, in Africa, and Europe, they cannot rely on them. Why? It's simply because of the term that the Imam used, because of the hadith. He said other cities. You can rely on other cities, but other cities can only refer to cities that were discovered back then. And that's why he made up this term, the old world and the new world. So this is the second modification of Sayyid al-Hakim, hafidhahullah. So now we understand the different views regarding moon sighting. Now we move on to the second part of our discussion. And that is relying on technology and science in determining the new month, the new moon. And the most important question that we have to address here is using the telescope. Are we able to rely on the telescope in sighting the moon, or does the moon have to be sighted with the naked eye? This is a discussion that the ulama have discussed, and there's a lot of disagreement about this discussion. There's some ulama that believe the moon has to be sighted by the naked eye. The telescope, we cannot rely on the telescope. But then again, there are other ulama that have said, no, we can rely on seeing the moon with the telescope as well. We can use science, we could use technology in order to determine these external factors, these astronomical factors. So here there's basically two views. The first group of ulama that believe we can rely on the telescope, and then the second view, the second set of ulama that believe we are not allowed to rely on the telescope. So I will mention the arguments of both sides, and we can make our own judgment. So I'll begin with the first group. The first group are those that say we can rely on the telescope in determining the new month. So if I was not able to see the moon, the crescent, with my naked eyes, but however I used the telescope and I saw it with the telescope, that is enough. You can begin the new month. Now, what's their justification for this? They gave us two arguments. More obviously, but I will mention two arguments. The first argument that these ulama mentioned, they said that the ahadith of the Imam, they told us صُمْ للرؤية وافطر للرؤية. They said that when you see the moon, begin the new month. When you see the new moon, start fasting, meaning Ramadan began. And when you see the new moon, then stop fasting. It's the day of Eid, it's the first day of Shawwal. So we understand that the new month begins by sighting the moon. These ulama, they said, when you see the moon with the telescope, you've seen it. The hadith of the Imam applies. صُمْ للرؤية. He said, start fasting when you see the moon. When I see it with the telescope, I saw it. So why can't I begin the new month? So they basically ask this question. They say, if I see the moon with the telescope, did I see it or did I not see it? If you say, no, I didn't see it, that's lying. Obviously you saw it. So since you can't choose the first option, you can't say, I didn't see it. That means you saw the moon. The Imam said, when you see the moon, begin the new month. So they said there's no reason why not to rely on it. When the hadith of the Imam clearly applies to this, when the hadith of the Imam clearly says, صُمْ للرؤية وافطر للرؤية, begin the new month when you see the moon, and this is a type of seeing the moon, why can't we rely on telescope in beginning the new month? And they give us an example to further clarify this point. They say, the ahadith tell us it's haram to see, for example, a woman who's not related to me, from my family, my mother, my sister, my daughter. It's haram for me to see her without hijab, right? So the Imams told us the word seeing her. We cannot see a woman that is not related to me without hijab. Let's say I have telescope. There's a woman that's very far. I use the telescope to see her, and she's not wearing hijab. Is this acceptable? They will say, every alim, every marja, even those that said you can't rely on the telescope in sighting the moon, they will tell you it is haram for you to see another woman without hijab using the telescope. Ask them why. They will tell you because you're seeing them. You're seeing that woman with the telescope. So, because this is a type of sight, and the Imam said you're not allowed to see the woman without hijab, they accepted telescope as well. They said telescope is also haram. Another example, if the hadith says if you see someone killing another person, then you can testify against him in the court. If I didn't see him with my naked eyes, but I saw him committing that crime with a telescope, am I allowed to go and testify? They will tell you, yes, of course, because you saw him. The point is you saw him. But they will tell you, because of these two examples, we see that when the Imams tell us if you saw something, then you can rely on any type of sight, whether it's naked or telescope. These ulama, they say, how come all the ulama accepted this with seeing a woman without hijab? They accepted this with testifying against someone. But when it came to the moon, they said no. They said this is a new type of sight that didn't exist during the type of the Imams. We can't rely on it. The point is, you saw the moon. And the Imam said, if you see the moon, the new month begins. So this is their first argument. They rely on the word som lil-ru'ya, ru'ya, sight. They say the Imam said, if there is sight, someone sees it, the new month begins. And with the telescope, you're seeing it. So what's the problem? That's the first argument they use. So that is the first argument, the proponents of this view, that we can use telescope in proving the new month. This is what they relied on. The second argument was they relied on a hadith. And this hadith is narrated from Imam Al-Kazim alayhi salam. It is sahih. It is authentic. The hadith is called Sahihat Ali ibn Ja'far. Ali ibn Ja'far, the brother of Imam Al-Kazim, he asked his brother, he asked Imam Al-Kazim one day this question. سأل أخاه موسى بن جعفر عن الرجل يرى الهلال في شهر رمضان وحده لا يبصره غيره. Ali ibn Ja'far, the brother of Imam al-Kazim, he asked his brother, he said, one day if someone spots the moon by himself, only he spots the moon, can he rely on that? He goes out and he sees the moon, but only he saw it, no one else. Can he rely on that or not? The Imam said, إذا لم يشك فليفطر وإلا فليصم مع الناس. The Imam said, he can rely on that. He can rely on that as long as he is sure, as long as he has no doubt, as long as he is sure that he saw the moon, he can rely on that. So the ulama, they said, this group of ulama, they said, why was it that only he saw the moon? They say there's two possibilities. Now Ali ibn Ja'far doesn't tell us in the hadith, why was it that only he spotted the moon? But they say there's two possibilities. Number one, either because he was the only one that went out for moonsighting, everyone else didn't, go out, or everyone else was sleeping, whatever reason. So that's the first possibility. The second possibility is no, many people went out, but yet only he saw it. Why? Isn't that fishy? 100 people go to spot the moon, but only he saw it. The reason why he was asking this question is because his eyes were very, very sharp, and that's why he's asking the Imam. 100 people went out, 20 people went out, no one saw it except one person. He said, I saw the moon. Because his eyes was more than 20/20. His eyes was very, very sharp. So he comes to the Imam and he asks him, can I rely on such a sight where only I saw it? I have, these incredible eyes that are very sharp. This is the second possibility. We have two possibilities. Which possibility helps us? The second one. If it's the first possibility, it has nothing to do with what we're trying to prove. Only if the second possibility was true, then it will help us. How? I'll explain that in a few seconds. So here we have two possibilities. Which one is it? We don't know. The ulama say that as long as the Imam didn't negate either one of the two possibilities, that means the answer of the Imam applies to both. This is basically a law that we always use, the ulama always use with the ahadith. Let me give you an example. If you ask your teacher, there's a test tomorrow, it's a very important test, and you ask him this question. You tell him, if I don't show up tomorrow, will I fail the test? And the teacher says, yes, you will fail the test. Now, here there's two possibilities why you didn't come to the test or you won't come to the test. Number one is because you had an excuse, you're sick. Number two is because you didn't have an excuse, you overslept. Now, because the teacher didn't explain, unless you're excused, that means his answer applies to both possibilities. Either you had an excuse or you didn't, or else why didn't he make it clear? If his answer only applied to those that weren't excused, he should have made that clear. He should have said, you will fail only if you had no excuse. If you can bring me a doctor's note, I will excuse you and I will allow you to take the test again. So since there were two possibilities and the teacher did not explain, that means his answer applies to all possibilities. This is a rule that the ulama use in fiqh. Anytime the Imam gives a broad answer, there's more than one possibility, the Imam didn't make it clear which possibility he was speaking about, that means it applies to all of the possibilities. So when the Imam was asked by Ali ibn Ja'far, he was asked only one person saw it, why didn't the Imam make it clear? Why was it that one person saw it? Maybe it was because only he went out to see it, or maybe it was because he had sharp eyes. Because the Imam didn't make it clear, it applies to all. It applies to all the possibilities. And hence, because of this rule, we understand that the Imam is basically saying, if a group goes out and only one sees it because his eyes was sharper than everyone else, he could rely on the new month. He can begin the new month because he saw it. The ulama say, if you have sharp, very sharp eyes, abnormal eyes, and you can, rely on your eyes, on your sharp eyes in determining the new month, then why can't we rely on the telescope? What's the difference? It's the same thing. The telescope is something that is above average, the average eye. Just like Ali ibn Ja'far's story, that person who relied on his sharp eyes. If we can prove that relying on sharp eyes is acceptable, then the telescope will also be accepted, because it's the same point, it's the same idea that they're above average. Anything that's above average, you can use it, Allah will use it. So they relied on the second hadith of Ali ibn Ja'far to prove this point, to prove that you can use the telescope. If you can rely on sharp eyes, then you can rely on telescope, because you can't, it's either this way or that way. It's either that we can only rely on normal eyes, or anything else is acceptable. There isn't a third view where, sharp eyes and normal eyes are acceptable but not telescope, because it doesn't make sense. Either we only accept normal eyes, or we accept anything that's above average, whether it's sharp eyes or whether it's through technology, and that is through the telescope. So these are the two arguments of the first camp, where they say we can rely on the telescope. The first is because when you're seeing the telescope, you're actually seeing it. The Imam says if you see it, then you can begin the new month, and with the telescope you're seeing the new moon. And number two, because of the hadith of Ali ibn Ja'far, and it is sahih. So this is the first camp. The second opinion is that no, we're not allowed to rely on the telescope in determining the new month. Why? They said also two arguments. Argument number one, they said if we were to accept the telescope, then many months we have, and I spoke about this last session, we have many times Laylatul Shak, the night of doubt. It's the 29th of, let's say, Sha'ban. We don't know tomorrow is the last of Sha'ban, 30th, or it's the first of Ramadan. It's the 29th of Ramadan. We don't know tomorrow is 30 Ramadan or 1 Shawwal. And this applies to every month. These ulama, they said if we were to accept the telescope, then most times, if you would, try this and experiment with this, most of the times where we were not able to see the moon with the naked eyes, it's possible to see it with a telescope. So that means most months, they will be 29 days, not 30 days. And the second problem that we'll have because of this is that most of our ibadah, most of our actions, especially during the times of the Imams, it was invalid. And I already mentioned this last week. They used this similar argument with the ulama that relied on ta'addud al-afaq, that you have to spot the moon locally. They relied on a similar argument. So basically what they said here, if we can rely on the telescope, what about the times of the Imams? The Imams would go out, they don't see it with the naked eyes. If they had a telescope, obviously they would see it, because many times it's possible to see the moon with the telescope one night earlier than it is with the naked eyes. 70-80% of the times, this is what they claim. So they said, since this is true, then that means Muslims for 1,000 years before the telescope was invented, and the Imams all those times, every month they began late, because they didn't have a telescope to see it. So they had to wait until the next night the crescent is a little bigger, they can see it with the naked eyes. We can't accept this, or else their fasting was wrong. Laylatul Qadr, they were always one night off, and Hajj, they went to Arafah one day late, just like we mentioned. Since we cannot accept this, obviously their a'mal were right, the a'mal of the Imams were right, that means we have to wait until the moon grows a little larger. It's possible to see it with the naked eye, then the new month begins. But if the moon is still very small and it's only possible to see it with a telescope, this shows you the new month has not began yet. We have to wait 10 more hours, 20 more hours the next night, only then the new month will begin. Or else the a'mal of the imams was all wrong because they didn't have a telescope. They missed out on the first night. So this is the second argument. This is the first argument of the ulama that say you cannot rely on the telescope. The second argument that the ulama, the second camp, relied on to say that we cannot rely on the telescope is that they referred to a law that the ulama use in fiqh. And that law is that all the subjects in the ahadith, when the imams talk about a certain subject, the subjects have to always be defined and applied to the customary, to the average, to the usual. So the subject and the words of the imams have to always be applied to the customary, to the average, to the usual. Now what does this mean? Let me give you an example. When it comes to wudu, the imams have told us exactly what we have to wash, what we have to wipe. So when it comes to the face, what parts of the face do we have to wash? The imams, they told us, if you want the width wise, the imams have explained that you have to wash this much. You take your hands from the tip of your middle finger to the tip of your thumb. Open it and place it across your face like this. This is the area width-wise where you have to wash it. So for a usual person, most people, it's from the sideburn to the sideburn, like this. This is the area. So beyond that, this area, I don't have to wash it because it exceeds this, this area. So this is what the imams explained. They defined it with the handspan like this. Now the ulama say, what if someone, God forbid, is deformed? Either his hands are too large, they're very, very big, he has very large hands, or his face is very, very small. And thus, because of this, when he puts his hand on his face, it will come, from ear to ear. Or what if his hands are too small? It'll be from, the cheek to the cheek. Then this person only has to do wudu in this area, or no, from the ear to the ear? The ulama, they say no. The imams, anytime they speak about something, the subjects, when they say the hand, the face, any subject in their hadith, they're always speaking about the customary, the average, the usual. They're not looking at those, they're not referring to those unusual instances, someone has unusual hands. They're speaking about an average person, the usual, the customary. So this is a general law that the ulama apply to all the ahadith. Another example, najasa. When it comes to najasa, if you have water, a bucket filled with water, one drop of water, one drop of najis falls in that water, one drop of blood, the entire bucket becomes najis. Unless that water is abundant, it's a lot, unless it reaches kur. If it is kur, then it will not become najis until the entire water becomes, changes. One drop won't make it najis. What is kur? The imams have defined to us exactly how much one kur is. For example, 1 gallon. How much is 1 kur? They defined it also with the handspan. They said 3.5 shibr. Shibr is the handspan. This is 1 shibr. 3.5 width times height times depth. This you'll get 1 kur. So once again, the ulama, they said, which hand is the imam speaking about? What if someone has a small hand? Can he consider a small amount as kur? If someone has huge hands, once again they said no. The imams are speaking about the customary, the usual. They're not speaking about someone that has abnormally small or large hands or a body part. They're speaking about the usual, the customary. The ulama took this very same rule and they applied it with the telescope. They argue with the first group. They say, yes, we accept your first argument. You said that when we see the moon with the telescope, aren't we seeing it? Khalas, the imam said when you see the moon, the new month begins. So what's the problem? They said the problem is, even though this is a type of sight, but it's an unusual type of sight. It's an unconventional type of sight. When the imam said when you see the moon, he's speaking about the typical ways that the people would see the moon. He was speaking about the average conventional ways, not unconventional ways through the telescope. And that's why right now, if I tell you right now, in the morning today, I saw a lion. what would you understand? You would understand that I saw it with the naked eyes, because this is the normal, conventional type of seeing something. If then I would tell you, no, I had this telescope that's so powerful, I went on the top of my house, on the roof, and I was looking, at jungles of Africa, and with my telescope I saw it. You would say, really? This is what you meant? This is weird. We didn't understand this from your words. This is exactly what they say about the hadith of the Imam. When you say, I saw a lion, that means you saw it through conventional, normal, usual, customary ways, and that is the naked eye. So when the Imam said, if you see the moon, then the new month begins, the Imam was speaking about the conventional ways of seeing something, the normal, average ways of seeing something, and that is seeing something with the naked eye, not seeing something with the telescope. This is uncustomary. This is unconventional, and that's why we always have to define and interpret the subjects of the Imams according to the usual, the customary, because people, they think in a typical way, even though the word has many applications, but usually people, they only understand few applications. Other applications, they're very far, they're distant, they're far-fetched. You wouldn't understand that. So we always have to apply the ahadith of the Imams to the conventional, to the customary. And that's why, based on this argument that they used, they said, when the Imam says, Sum lil-ru'ya, waftar lil-ru'ya, when you see the moon, Ramadan begins. When you see the moon, Ramadan ends, stop fasting. They were speaking about the average, customary, usual, conventional ways of seeing the moon, and that is with the naked eyes. With the telescope, sorry, we cannot rely on this. So thus, they say, based on these two arguments, we cannot rely on the telescope. Inshallah, in our next session, we will mention one final point about using technology, using science to determine the new month, and that is relying on astronomers. Are we allowed to rely on astronomers when it comes to determining the new month or not? Inshallah, next session I will go over this topic, and then we will begin a new mas'ala, a new discussion. هذا وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.